Thank you, and please be seated. Our gospel lesson this morning comes from Mark. Hear this good word. The Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And they observe many other traditions, such as washing of cups and pitchers and kettles. So the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with defiled hands?" He replied, "Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, 'These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules.' You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions." Again, Jesus called the crowd to him and said, "Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it is what comes out of a person that defiles them. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come: sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and defile a person." I said. Neil Diamond, I think, illustrates this passage pretty well. LA's fine. Sun shines most of the time. The feeling is laid back. Palm trees grow and the rents are low, but I keep thinking about making my way back. Well, I'm New York City born and raised, but nowadays I'm lost between two shores. LA's fine, but it ain't home. New York's home, but it ain't mine no more. I said, to no one there. And no one heard at all, not even the chair. I cried. I am, said I. And I am lost, and I can't even say why, leaving me lonely still. Figuring out who we are is the greatest challenge of this experience. From the time we are born, we have someone, something, religion, culture, everything outside of us defining who we are and often even informing us of our own worth. So here we have a story where Jesus is being confronted by the most righteous. You have to understand this. We see the Pharisees as the bad guys. They were people who were considered the most righteous and held up to incredible esteem because they claimed to obey every one of the 600, and where's David when I need him? 13 laws. And they were looked upon as righteous people, and they were totally put out that Jesus' disciples would eat without washing their hands first. And as Mark goes on to share that this was a common thing of washing not only their hands, but cups and kettles and pots and pitchers and all kinds of other things. There was a ritual behind it, you see. And they especially did this when they came out of the marketplace, because you see, while you were among people, if someone in that crowd was unclean and you somehow had contact with them, even though you didn't know it, you yourself could become unclean. So we can see all the focus is on the outside. So they ritually washed their hands in such a way so that when they ate their food, the food they took in would not be dirty, thus not making their soul dirty. And how does Jesus respond to this? "You hypocrites, See, Jesus wasn't always so nice and sweet, right? I mean, no one wants to be called a hypocrite, right? Hypocrite comes from the Greek word which is mask. In Greek theater, one actor could portray several different characters simply by changing a mask, you see? And the masks were designed in such a way that there would be a whole piece so that as they spoke through the mask, it would help to be able to hear everyone in the theater to hear. So when Jesus calls them a hypocrite, it's not so much what we understand in our own language as someone doing something opposite of what they say. It's hiding behind a mask. And they used their religion as their mask. They used their ability to discipline themselves to obey all the rules as their mask. And they felt because they had somehow achieved this level of religious superiority that it enabled them to judge those who were lesser than them. And it seems as though they literally feared that if they had something dirty on the outside and it went inside their body, that it would make them dirty. You know why we yawn when we cover our mouth when we yawn? It was believed once upon a time that if there was an evil spirit swirling around your head, when you open your mouth that wide, it'd have plenty of room to get in. It's to protect you. Okay, you don't buy that, right? If you do, come see me later in the week, and we'll spend a couple of years together and try to work that out. And Jesus is teaching them it's not what's on the outside that defiles a person. You see? And then he quotes Isaiah. See, it's one of the best things you can do when you want to support your beliefs is find some scripture to quote. And Isaiah says, you celebrate me with your lips, but basically your service is in vain. And then Jesus goes on to share that you follow your traditions over the commands of God. And what Jesus is teaching them and us is what we do and what we say is a mirror of what's inside us, not what's outside us, right? How many of you growing up, your parents says, don't run around with that crowd, they're a bad influence on you. Because they were afraid if you ran around with that crowd, you would become like them. Totally oblivious to the fact that the reason why you're running around with that crowd is because you identify with that crowd, right? Never ever thinking that their son Johnny, they've warned about him hanging out with Tommy, that Tommy's parents are telling him the same thing about Johnny, right? Not my little angel. What happens and what we say and what we do is a mirror of who we are internally. It's a mirror of who we are internally. If I show an act of kindness because I think that in doing so it's going to make God happy and I'm going to get to heaven, then that act of kindness in my world is pretty hollow. If I show compassion to a stranger and I welcome them in and show them hospitality, but I do so because I think in doing so I'm going to get a bigger mansion in heaven, then my act is not genuine and sincere, you see. We often think that Jesus was perfect. Well, it depends on whose eyes you're looking through. To the most religious and devout people of his day, he was such a blasphemer that they decided he had to die because he was just such a horrible reality against God. See? For Jesus, it was not the rules that made the person. What makes the person is already in them. Our religion can inspire us and can help us, but because we obey the religious rules doesn't necessarily mean we're good people. I can testify to you that some of the meanest people I've ever met and the people who have stolen from me financially are the most religious people I've ever encountered in the world. See? Because when you are in a religion of rules and regulations, then if you're following the rules, it doesn't really matter what you're doing to people. And what Jesus is challenging his religious leaders of his day is what you do to people says more about who you are than any rules. It's not what's on the outside that defiles us, but it's what's already in our heart and our mind and our soul. Recently, we've had a very important event in our country, I think, that helps illustrate this. And that is the passing of Senator John McCain. When I heard the news that he died, I grieved. I even cried a little bit. When I watched on TV the military men taking his casket and placing it in the rotunda of the Capitol, I stood with my hand over my heart because I honored him and I loved him. But was it because of his political views? I could not be more opposite than John McCain in his political views. I did not agree with him in his politics, but I knew that he was a human being of incredible integrity. And because of that, when he would share something or say something that was opposite of my beliefs, I would pause for a moment and just reconsider my beliefs because I knew from where his views were coming from. When he was a POW in Vietnam, a young man, shot down, injured in the crash, beaten and tortured. Because his dad was a famous admiral in the Navy, the Vietnamese offered to let him go as a gesture of goodwill during the war. And he said, "No, not unless my band of brothers can go with me." Where does that come from? I don't believe it came from the fact that he was a prisoner of war. It was already there, you see. That sense of duty and loyalty and courage, you see. None of us know how we would react in situations of extreme pain and suffering. I would like to think that I would do the same thing that he did. But you know what? If he had gone home, I wouldn't have blamed him or judged him for it, for what he was enduring. He said no and endured more, you see. There was something in him that was so real and genuine that he could be trusted. And I believe that with his passing, the world grieved and mourned with him, not because of his legislation, but because who he was as a man, as a human being. If I were ever being picked on by a bully, I would be glad and thrilled that John McCain jumped on my side. Why do I believe in Jesus? Is it because somehow he's holier than any human being? No. Is it because somehow he was morally perfect, never said a cuss word, never looked upon a woman long? No. Why do I believe in Jesus? Is it because, and I celebrate you, why? Is it because if I don't, I'm going to spend an eternity in hell? Absolutely not. I don't believe in a three-tiered universe. I've seen space shuttles and Hubble and satellites. I know that the three-tiered universe doesn't exist, right? So many religions use fear, shame, and guilt to manipulate their masses, right? I choose to follow Jesus because he did not believe that way. He did not teach that way. I believe in Jesus because I believe that while he was upon this earth, what he did and what he said came from a place of genuine compassion. When he looked upon the crowds, as we saw a few weeks ago, and saw them hungry at the end of a long day, it says he looked upon the crowd and saw them as sheep without a shepherd, someone to lead them, and they were hungry. And it says that he was moved with compassion. The Greek word means from the bowels. You can't get much more inside than that, right? He was moved. So when he looked upon people and healed them, it was from a place of genuine love and compassion. When he took time to teach Nicodemus at night about what the Holy Spirit is. It's because he looked at Nicodemus as a human being who somehow was searching but somehow was lost, right? The Neil Diamond song, I Am, I Said, I imagine Nicodemus could relate to very well. A Pharisee on the one hand, but wanting to follow Jesus on the other. He had to be a man lost in between the two. See, the reason why I teach Jesus, the reason why I study Jesus, is not to save me from something, but because he inspires me and I want to live and be more like him. When I teach a class, when I preach a sermon, when I go to the hospital, when I do counseling, when I see a person who is hungry, I do it because I am moved from within my soul to do it. If I have to stop and do the WWJD, I never understood that campaign. If you've got to stop and ask, there's a hungry person there, what would Jesus do? Okay, well then there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and okay, there's that. You've already missed the opportunity. One of the reasons why I was never able to be very good at conversational Spanish, I was able to read it and write it once upon a time, but you speak to me in Spanish, I'm translating it to English, and then I think of my response to you in English, and then try to translate it, and by the time that happens, the opportunity is gone, right? What moves us to do the things we do? Is it to avoid pain and suffering? Is it to avoid the wrath of God? Then we're doing it for the wrong reasons. My wife Amy is one of the most beautiful human beings I know. And she says that when she does something, it's not because God wants her to, or Jesus wants her to, or Muhammad wants her to, or Krishna, or Buddha. She says because it's just the right thing to do. You see somebody hurting and struggling, you help them. Because it's the right thing to do. Without going through some kind of religious entity. I admire that in her. Why do we do what we do? When I've done evil in my life, when I've performed acts of evil, it didn't come from not washing my hands. It's because in that moment in time, I compromised my humanity. Because of ignorance or because of selfishness, I chose to compromise my soul. Had nothing to do with Johnny or Tommy down the street. Nothing to do because I didn't recite the Lord's Prayer properly or the Apostles' Creed. Nothing to do because I skipped church that week before. It had to do with within me, I lost my compass. I lost my humanity in that moment in time. And when I do something as a genuine act of kindness and compassion, it's not because I washed my hands properly. It's because of the mentors and the stories of Jesus and other great human beings, and they inspire and trigger that which is already in me, you see? The POW experience didn't make John McCain a courageous man. He was already courageous. It just brought that courage out on a new level. And when I celebrate Jesus and when I study Jesus and when I try to integrate Jesus into my life, it's not that Jesus is putting it there. Jesus is just awakening that spark of the divine which has always been there, you see. So what I want to challenge you with this morning is just simply ask the question, why do I do what I do? Is it a cover-up? Is it a mask? I'm going to be very nice to this group of people over here because if they knew who I really was, they would never invite me to the party. Good to see you. Good to see you. When inside you may be loathing them, right? It's hypocritical. Don't wear the mask. Be who you are. Be who you are. Did you ever read about a frog who dreamed of being a king and then became one? Well, except for the name and a few other changes, the stories. A few other changes, if you talk about me, the story is the same one. I am, I cried. I am, said I. Who are you? And are you living that to its fullest potential? Jesus never compromised his humanity or his soul, even in the face of a cross, even in the face of pain and suffering, even in the face of his whole community rejecting him, even when his disciples and he even felt God had abandoned him. Jesus never compromised his humanity or his soul. And that is what inspires me to go as deep as I can go within myself so I can answer the question. I am. I cried. I am, said I. Thus ends the lesson. Let us now prepare our mind and our heart for communion. I'm going to ask Angela to please come forward and assist me this morning. And while she's coming up, I want to share with you that we practice communion by intinction. What that means is Angela will be holding the bread and I will be holding the cup. You take the bread, you dip it in the cup, and then you eat. Another thing I want to share with you is that for us, communion is open.